I've started running recently. If you follow my Facebook page, you'll know that I've been doing the Couch to 5K, which is a really good program. It takes people who, like me, like the chips, like the couch, like just sitting and playing computer games or watching TV, and gets them to run, eventually, 5 kilometres in a run. That's brand new for me. And 2 months ago I would have said, you're kidding, right? Seriously? But I'm running. What I found helps when I'm running, so when you start off you do a 60-second run and a 90-second walk, and a 60-second run and a 90-second walk, and it's all good. But what I've found with the longer runs is I just set myself a goal. I'm going to make that telegraph pole. I'm going to make that telegraph pole. I'm going to get my foot in front of the other foot. I'm going to make one more step, and then the sweet, sweet voice of the guy on my phone says, walk. And I go, thank you, I can walk. But I always look forward to my next goal. I always look forward to the next telegraph pole, the next step, to keep going. I have a goal, and I don't actually have a goal to run 5 kilometres. I couldn't care less about the distance or the time that I run, but I want to get fit. I love my wife, I love my children, and I don't want to give them an early grave for me. So I'm getting fit. I'm trying to eat less rubbish, etc., because I love my family. And so, I keep my eyes on the goal. And when the alarm goes off in the morning, I really don't want to get out of bed. In fact, today is the first day that the alarm has gone off and I've gone, actually no, I can't do that, because it was a busy night last night. But my goal is to keep doing it, to keep going, to do the run so that I can do the next run, so that I can do the next run. And when I'm running, my goal is to finish that 3-minute run or that 5-minute run to get to the next telegraph pole so that I can keep running. Christians need to look forward. We need to look back to Jesus, but we need to look forward to heaven. Because if we lose sight of heaven, this world doesn't make sense. If we lose sight of heaven, the sufferings and persecution and difficulties of this life will overwhelm us and we will give up. In Ezekiel 40 to 48, so it's 9 chapters. Next week I'm doing 4 verses. It'll be fun. In Ezekiel 40 to 48, we're given a picture of the new temple. And I hope you noticed that there was a lot of detail in chapter 40. There was a lot of detail about exactly how big each room was to be. Sounded a little bit like God got bored. Okay, I've got to give all the detail of this one, and then we're just going to replicate the rooms. But it's showing a symmetry and a perfection about this temple, this new temple, because the old temple had been destroyed. You might remember that we're talking somewhere around 550 perhaps yes, 550 BC, and Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, has destroyed the temple. He's taken all the good stuff out, all the gold, all the silver, all the brass, and has actually destroyed the temple. And so the temple, which is the centre of the religious life of the Jewish people, is gone. And so God says, I'm going to give you a new temple. And it doesn't come out of heaven, but it's to be rebuilt. It's seen in a vision that God gives Ezekiel. And it's this square, and it's perfect. But as you go through the passage, and we didn't read all 9 chapters, I did, but we didn't read them all tonight because we want to finish before like 8:30 tomorrow morning. as you go through it, it just becomes more and more obvious that this picture is impossible. The size of the temple is about 9 times the length of the original temple built by Solomon, and 20 times the width. It's a square. And as you keep going, it's just bigger and bigger. It's 3 levels. And then you get to about halfway through the description, and there's a river flowing out of the temple. It starts small, but ends up massive and huge, and it flows into the Dead Sea, and it heals the Dead Sea. It takes the saltiest place on the planet and makes it fresh water, because this water is flowing from the temple. Now, it's important to see what God is saying here. It's important to understand that this is not a promise that God means for this life, because if it is, God has failed. If God meant for this physical temple to be built in this physical world, in the actual place of Israel, then God has failed. It's been 2,500 years, and we still haven't seen this temple. Herod the Great built a massive temple, much bigger than Solomon's temple, but still nowhere near this size, at about 10 BC. Around the time. Remember, Jesus is walking around, and the apostles are saying, "Look at the temple, look at the big stones," and etc. That's nothing compared to this one. That temple, it's just a child's plaything compared to this one. And what we need to understand is, if God meant for that physical building to be built, then God has failed. And what's more is that the people of Israel are essentially lost to us. You see, when Assyria came in and took the northern tribes away, it actually eradicated the northern tribes of Israel, with some exceptions of people who were still living in the area or moved out. With some exceptions, the northern tribes are gone. And here, in these last chapters of Ezekiel, we see God says, "I will have all of my people back again." What's more is that the last part of this book describes the distribution of the land, and God just ignores things like mountains and seas and all of those geological and geographical things that we think are important are just dismissed, as God equally distributes the land to the people that don't exist anymore. So what does this mean? Is this just a fairy tale? And you take and you go, well, you take what you want out of it, you take the meaning you want. Or is there something else? It actually means God is talking about something different, something new, something more than just the physical distribution of the physical land and the physical people of God. In fact, God is talking about a brand new people. In fact, if all of you had was the Old Testament, the Torah, the scriptures that Jesus knew when he was born and lived, you'd be missing something. You would be missing the possible fulfillment of this promise. See, when Jesus was walking on this planet, people who knew this story, well, they were looking for a physical manifestation of God's promises. That's why when they're talking about a Messiah, they're going, "He's going to kick the Romans out. We're going to have our people back. We're going to have our land back. We're going to have no more people telling us what to do, because God is going to rule." They'd be thinking that God would bring about a change in this world of cataclysmic proportions, of valleys physically being lifted up and mountains being brought low. A la Isaiah 40. But when we come to Jesus, he just completely changes everything. He reorients everything, and find out it's about him. We see that Jesus is the one in whom that these promises cannot be met in this life, but they will be in the next. We see what true resurrection hope looks like in Jesus. And that's why we had the second reading being from Revelation 21. What Ezekiel is really talking about here is heaven. You see, in the second reading, we didn't get all the way through it, but there is no temple in heaven. That's because the temple is where we meet God. And God says, I will live with you. I will be with you. I will be your God, and you will be my people. And that's the crossover between these two passages. It's a reversal of the judgment of God on the people of Israel. A little while back we saw in Ezekiel chapter 10 that the glory of the Lord left the temple. And we just don't get that. We go, oh, the glory of the Lord is everywhere. God is everywhere. But for the people of Israel, the idea that God would leave the temple, which is his special place where his name lived, it was horrific. That God would leave the temple was just terrible. It was judgment. And in chapter 43, the glory of God returns to the temple. He is back where he belongs. He is among his people. The punishment and disgrace of God removing himself from his people and punishing his people is reversed by him saying, I will live with you. The people of God are now with God. God will be their God and they will be his people. And so what's on view here? It's not the physical building. No, it's us. We are the temple. God lives among us as Christians. We are the people of God. We are the kingdom of God. God lives with us. You see, in one sense, Jesus is the temple. Jesus is where we come to meet God. But once we become Christians, we are where the world comes to meet God. And God meets his new people through us. On Saturday, that was just last night. Saturday night was just last night. Yes. Man. On the way back from seeing Rice, some of you guys won't know this. We're going along and someone, who shall remain nameless, said, why don't we talk to people on the train about Jesus? And I said, it's a great idea. Who are you going to start with? And we ended up talking to a few people about Jesus. Now, someone was already a Christian. A couple of people had no idea what we were talking about. And so we tried to fill it out, and they said, actually, I've got to get off the train now. Still moving. Really odd. But, people were hearing more about Jesus because we are the people that other people will meet Jesus through. And so we see in this closing section of Ezekiel that God does not forget his promises. All those promises God made to Abraham, he did not forget them. He fulfills them. God did not abandon his people, but he collects them and gathers them and places them in his new holy land. God does not allow the enemies of his people to flourish, but brings them low. God does not allow his holy land to be defiled and desolate, but populates it with a people who worship him. God puts his people in his place under his rule. That is, his kingdom is made manifest, and it's made manifest amongst